Hi, my name is Joshua Furman. I'm the curator of the Houston Jewish History Archive at Rice University, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Marilyn Levitch Hassid. Marilyn was most recently the Assistant Executive Director at the Evelyn Rubenstein Jewish Community Center of Houston, where she was for 35 years. And we're looking forward to hearing from her about growing up in Houston and her time directing arts and culture at the JCC. Marilyn, hello, how are you?
Hi, great to be with you. Thank you so much. This is an honor.
It's an honor for us. So why don't we start, tell us a little bit about your family background and when and why your family came to Houston.
So we lived in Kansas City, Missouri. That's where I was born. And 1962, we moved to Houston. My father was in business with his brothers, not a happy situation, and they wanted to open up a second space. He went to Jacksonville, Florida in 1961 and Houston, Texas, and he said Houston was the city of the future. So he moved down here first while my sister and my mom and I stayed in Kansas City so she could finish her last year of school there. We moved down a year later. The business was up and running. Little did I know that where my father lived as a kind of bachelor was the Park Towers on Holcomb, which was apparently a swinging singles place with a bar, deli, and all kinds of things. And a lot of these single Jewish men lived there. Unfortunately, my dad passed away before I found out about it, so I didn't have a chance to really talk to him about it.
Yeah. What was the family business, by the way?
Oh, they built truck bodies. It started in Baku, Russia, building carriages for the oil, which is kind of weird because Houston is a sister city with Baku, Russia. But anyway, that's what it was. It became motorized in Kansas City, and then Dad opened up the second business here in Houston. It's expanded now. My sister runs it, but that's what it was. The back end of the trucks, fancy, specialized.
And tell us your parents' names and everyone else in your immediate family.
Oh, okay. So my mother, Sadie Levitch, half Galiciana, half Litvak. My father, Buck, was born in America, but family was from Baku. His name was Morris, and they called him Chick. And actually, he was Little Chick because he had a brother that was Big Chick. Kind of popular names at the time.
Little Chick and Big Chick.
Yeah, so we ended up here in Houston, and 1962, we were living at the Stonecrest Apartments on Stella Link, which was the place where a lot of Jewish people lived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell us more about that era, about, Houston, the Jewish community in the 1960s.
Okay.
Tell us what it was like.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we lived at the Stonecrest, and oh my gosh, Mr. Spritzer was there. He's a Holocaust survivor. He was a furrier. Ralph Marx lived there. He was a big time marketing person. Anyway, it was right there on Stella Link in the area where the McGovern Library and the Weekly Y are right now. So I could walk to Mark Twain Elementary, which is where I went. I could walk to Pershing Junior High, which is where I went we called it junior high back then. Goodman Butcher was right there, and is it Beth Jacob was the Orthodox shul that was right around the corner. So we were at the Stonecrest right there on Stella Link for a year, maybe a year and a half, and then we moved down the road to Link Valley, which is a street between 610 and Willow Bend. In fact, today the Emery-Weiner School is right down the street. At the time, Link Valley was called Bagel Alley because so many Jews lived there. We lived in the Jamestown with lots of other Jewish people, and the Williamsburg fronted Stella Link on Link Valley, but it was much more expensive. Growing up at that time was amazing. I mean, I was Pershing, I was a cheerleader, hung out with the football guys, but there was also Esquires, which was the Jewish boys social and service fraternity in junior high, and it was the precursor to those boys moving on to Sigma Alpha Rho, which was the Jewish high school fraternity. And these were national fraternities, and there was also a sorority that I ended up joining in high school. So we were there for a number of years, and it really seems like life revolved around the synagogues and Alfred's Delicatessen. Monday night smorgasbord, Sunday morning brunches. My dad hung out with a group on Saturday mornings. We joined Beth Yeshua because it was closest to what we grew up with in Kansas City, except that it had an organ, which was shocking. And more shocking than that was coming to Houston in 1962 and seeing colored and white bathrooms and drinking fountains. That was not anything we ever had in Kansas City.
How old were you in 1962 when you first came?
I was 11.
You were 11.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sixth grade.
Okay, so then tell me more about segregation in Houston at that time and what you remember about it.
I do not remember a single person of color at Mark Twain or at Pershing.
Mm-hmm.
At Bellaire, I don't remember, although maybe someone was there. It was just everything was white. And, listen, we joined the Shamrock Hilton Hotel. Court Club. It was a club there that was just awesome, and you could go there. There was no liquor by the drinks. You had to belong to a club. So my family, we'd go there on a Saturday night, and we'd have meal and drinks. And Tony Martin would be singing if he was in town. But it also included the pool, and so I was hanging out at the pool. A lot of Jewish kids were hanging out there in the '60s, as well as people from the general community. And I distinctly remember, it was before I kept kosher, I distinctly remember not only how delicious the burgers were, but that you could order it and an African-American man dressed in long sleeve white jacket would deliver it to where you were sitting, in the land, the green area. Mm-hmm. And it was that same feel at Sakowitz. Mom and I would go to Sakowitz on Saturday. That was a big deal. And we'd eat lunch at the Sakowitz restaurant, whatever it was. And like all the waiters were African-American in these crisp white, it was like nothing like I'd ever seen in Kansas City.
Yeah, sure. Definitely some culture shock.
Right.
Sure. Tell us about the scene at Alfred's Delicatessen, this landmark of Jewish Houston for decades.
Yes, with House of Books, Bernard Shapiro's House of Books right down the way. So the scene, you always ran into people, which created lots of conversation. I remember being fascinated by the deli part of the, when you walked in, there was like the deli part where you could order and take out, and then you could buy things off the shelf. And I was fascinated by the fact that they had these chocolate covered crickets or something, nothing that we ever bought, but I was like, what is that? Again, growing up in Kansas City, we never ate shellfish, but coming down here, we found out that a lot of Jewish people, they would eat bacon, but not ham, and they would eat shrimp and crab and lobster. It was just, Southern kosher, I heard it referred to as once. But anyway, so Alfred was just this bustling place. Like I say, there was the Saturday morning group of guys that would go there, men, for years and years, actually up and almost to the point where my father passed away. He was still going on Saturdays to hang out with a small group. It was the place to be.
Mm-hmm. And then what about Beth Yeshua at that time?
Okay, so joined Beth Yeshua. That is where I had my bat mitzvah. Dr. Joshua Weinstein was the educational director at the time. It came to and he later became head of the Ed Psych department at University of Houston, which is where I took my master's. So I studied under him again. So when it came to my bat mitzvah, I wanted to wear a little white knit yarmulke with little gold trim, very cute, and they didn't do that here. And so my mother had to get permission from the ritual committee for me to do that. They also used to usher the bar and bat mitzvah kids down this long aisle at Barg Sanctuary, now called Barg Sanctuary, and boys would walk down boys, girls would walk down girls. They'd be playing the organ music. A whole promenade. Well, I wanted boys. I had more boy friends than girl friends, and aesthetically it looked nicer because they were all in suits. So we got permission for that. And then the third thing we had to get permission for is I wanted to sing a song that I loved from Kansas City, Me'al Pisgat Har Hatzofim. I mean, from the Mount Scopus, you look on Jerusalem. And I wanted to sing that. We got special permission, and I was able to add an additional song to my bat mitzvah ceremony. But yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to ask, just what were the other ritual components of a Beth Yeshua and bat mitzvah at that time?
Definitely no Torah reading. I had Haftorah. Great, the one with King David and his Betulah Na'ara, I mean his young, right, okay. Like, make a speech on that. So yeah, so it's like we just did some things on Friday night. I was by myself. People were doubling up. Again, that was unheard of in Kansas City. I did not want to have a partner. We had to kind of battle that. So it's kind of basic. And on Shabbos morning, it was the Haftarah and your speech, but there was no blessing with the parents and the, hands over the head and the blessing of none of that. Mm-hmm. It was kind of chick-chock, right?
Do you remember anything that Rabbi Meir said that day?
No. But I loved him.
Yeah.
I will tell you that Barbara Pillar, may she rest in peace, and I were the first two women to read from the Torah at Beth Yeshua when it finally became approved.
Wow.
I was a college student or a post-grad or whatever. Yeah. So.
That's a great piece of history. Moving on a little bit. So another aspect about growing up Jewish in Houston that I like to learn about is, the question of anti-Semitism. You've been talking a lot about, coming from Kansas City to Houston and some of the real stark differences that you perceive. So I'm just wondering, did you ever experience any kind of anti-Semitism at Pershing, at Twain, during your time growing up?
Well, there are two pieces to this. I did not experience anything specifically toward me. However, my first day at Mark Twain, when my teacher, Mrs. Cochran, called the roll, I said, yeah, and which is something we would say in Kansas City. And she said, Marilyn Levitch. And I went, yeah, like that. And she said, stand up. Anyway, she humiliated me in front of the class. I'd only been in Houston for a week. And she said, down here, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. Well, I never forgot that. But then when I was thinking about it, literally the other day, looking at your questions, I thought, I think there was a little something underlying that. But that was the only thing, and it really wasn't that overt. I just think that there was something going on. Interestingly enough, I thought back to Kansas City. I do remember African-American boys and girls in our school. So it was integrated, and Kansas City was not a bastion of equality, but at that point we had already broken through that. Mm-hmm. So fast forward, the biggest, we could call it anti-Semitic experience was the Bellaire High School graduation of 1969, which I can tell you about. Interesting, in high school, everybody hung out in these clusters. There were the STP and SAR cluster before class, and then at lunch there was the BBG 63 and the Cyrus Adler, groups. Everybody's in their clusters, the surfers, the theater people, including Dennis Quaid, Randy Quaid, and Marianne Williamson, who was also a cheerleader the year after me and was a sorority sister in STP, I might add. So everybody was in their clusters. Bellaire was like 42% Jewish, I heard, at that time. But Harlan Andrews, brother of Dana Andrews, the actor, and Steve Forrest, I believe, also an actor. Harlan Andrews was the first principal at Bellaire High School. And he had a choice of when graduation would take place. And he picked Friday night. And so 3 of us got wind of this. Al Hiller, who was, if he wasn't valedictorian, he was way up there. Then actually fast forward, he became president of the JCCC, plus a lot of, so we crisscrossed a lot. His father was very involved with ADL and ZOA, Zionist Organization of America nationally. Jay Peters, who's a pulmonologist in San Antonio right now, and well, we got wind of this and said, this is ridiculous. They need to change the date, which Harlan Andrews would not, could not, whatever. So we staged a boycott. And our goal was that all Jewish students would attend services that night instead of going to our graduation. So what transpired at that point was that when they went and changed the date and they knew the boycott was happening, Harlan Andrews determined, because we heard it was like it was a state law that you had to attend your graduation to get your diploma. So he came up with, well, you have to have a permission slip signed by your rabbi and your parents. Well, Jojo Hiller jumped in, Al's father, and was like, this is, you know, separation of church and state issues, and he got that wiped out. Interestingly enough, the rabbis in the community told us we were hypocrites. They said, you don't go to services anyway, so why now? And our position was because it's a law, and they're telling us what we have to do. They've taken our choice, our religious freedom away. We ended up getting some national attention, and then the rabbis came on board, and they were just gung-ho. We were doing the right thing. Now, I found an article, if I could just sidebar a little. I found an article by Mr. Gonzalez in a 2012 Houston Chronicle paper. And he was talking about Bellaire High School and Harlan Andrews, and he said that in 1969, that Bellaire was well known for very accomplished, and those, quote, he put them in quote, not so accomplished students. And he quoted Harlan Andrews as saying something like, the reason that there are problems at the school is that there are older, far left members, something like this, I'm paraphrasing, I have the actual quote, of the, what was it, Democratic Society, Students for a Democratic Society. That's what he said in 1969. Now, big question, who was he talking about, right? He had already spread the rumor that we were going to burn down the building, which we were not going to do. But that's a quote from Harlan Andrews from 1969. He was clearly talking about us, and given that the SDS had members of the group named Hoffman and Rubin, it wasn't hard to make the leap of what he was saying. So anyway, David White, who was the founder and ran the Jewish Herald Voice, he said that that these students needed to be commended, that what we were doing was very brave. So most all Jewish students, and one who was not of the Jewish faith, boycotted graduation that night. We all went to our respected services. The rabbis asked us if we wanted some kind of recognition or ceremony. It was like, no, we just want to come to services and just be among the congregational family. And then everybody was invited to our house for an Oneg Shabbat afterwards.
Nice. Do you look back on that moment, you know, as a particular point of pride? And do you think it had an impact on you moving forward? Because you clearly, you know, as we'll talk about, you've given so much to the Jewish community over the course of your long career. Is this a moment when why did you feel so passionately about this?
It came naturally. It just came naturally. And by that point, look, I grew up in a house, before my father was in the family business, he was a grocer. And the story goes is that because it was a sundown town, Kansas City at that time, he used to run groceries up to the African-American population that lived up on the hill. I mean, he used to say, I used to take the groceries up. They could come down to play in the clubs, which were actually a block away from where my father's grocery store was, 10th Street and Vine, that whole area of Kansas City. So I grew up knowing this. My parents were big FDR Kennedy people. We were glued to the TV during the '67 war. At that point in high school, I was already getting wind of the whole Refusnik movement. And actually in STP, in our sorority, we were social action, but not quite that kind of social action. I remember telling everybody, we have to get on board with this and things like that. Quite honestly, we were more into partying and, whatever, we were doing that weekend. But so all of that was already in my gut from my parents. My mother was very involved with what was then called the Jewish Home for the Aged. She single-handedly overhauled the volunteer system and organized it. And there was my dad, who broke out in We Shall Overcome at the Passover table one time when we came across the words in the Maxwell House or whatever one we were using, Haggadah. This is what I grew up with. So it just came naturally and then carried forward with me to college, where I became quite active on behalf of Jewish causes and also, of course, anti-Vietnam and protesting for African-American studies on campus.
Yeah.
Until it's like, well, we probably need Jewish studies too.
Yeah, tell us more about your college years. As far as your involvement with Jewish causes.
Okay, so I wanted to go to Brandeis, but my parents literally said, we're not sending you to Brandeis so you can become Angela Davis. So that gives you an idea of where I was and also where my parents were. So I went to the University of Oklahoma in Norman and followed my boyfriend there. At the beginning, it was all, Vietnam War activity, African-American studies on campus. I was determined to graduate in 3 years, which I did. But my second year, when I moved into the sorority house and joined AE5, the sorority, there were 3 Jewish sororities and 3 Jewish fraternities on campus. Those were the days when we were Jewish and then, And in walks this guy with a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops and shorts, and said, "Hi, I'm the new rabbi in town." And that was Rabbi Jonathan Porth, who had just graduated the Jewish Theological Seminary, and his first assignment was Hillel and Norman, Oklahoma. And he really activated us, both at the Hillel, United Jewish Campaign. I remember someone gave me $5. I'd throw it back at them and say, "Don't give me your pizza money. You can afford more than that." I mean, that gives you an idea of my approach to things. So he really activated us, and there was this really close, this nucleus. We all went by last names. It was Porath, Siegel, Danny Siegel, his best friend who left the seminary and came down and lived with him periodically, Levitch, and Jefferson, who is Larry Jefferson here in town, Dr. Larry Jefferson. So the 4 of us were the nucleus, and then there was this whole group. And we, Hillel, there were classes and studies and the holidays, and every Friday we were at Rabbi Porath's, and then we'd walk to Shul and back, and then we'd play battle all night. And if he wanted to watch a movie, at the 10 o'clock movie or 10:30, he put it on the Shabbos timer, and then of course it would go off before the end, and he would go crazy. Saturday, walk to Shul, walk back, and then walk to the stadium during football season, where all of us, including Rabbi Porath, watched the football games. Back for rest, Havdalah, and then off to the pizza parlor where Rabbi Porath had koshered one of the ovens. It was owned by a Jewish guy who didn't identify, but he just thought it was a hoot that we had a kosher pizza oven and would order these huge vegetarian pizzas every Saturday night and then go to the movies. So
great.
What was going on with me in high school, so what was going on with me in high school in terms of this activity on behalf of Israel and the refuseniks carried on to college. And Rabbi Porth even did more. He introduced me to Elie Wiesel. I mean, first of all, literally, figuratively in terms of read these books. And then literally, when the Tulsa Jewish community paid for 2 of us to go to Tulsa to hear Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel had been his teacher, so we got to meet him. That was the first time I met him. Mm-hmm. The Tulsa community also sent 2 of us, and I think it was Jefferson. It's hard to break the last name business. And the 2 of us went to Pittsburgh for the Jewish Federation General Assembly that year. Now, that was like 1971, I guess, or 71. It had to be because it's always in November, right? And I graduated in 72. Right, so it had to be 71. So the first person I run into, starry-eyed, is Professor Hillel Levine, who, if you have, put this in context, in 1971, Hillel Levine, the year before in Boston, or 2 years before in Boston, he and a group of students took over the podium at the GA demanding money for Jewish day school education. The other group that was there, also rock stars, were the Jewish Defense League. Now, at the time, the JDL, they were all a bunch of religious, hunky guys. At the time, their primary job was that they were patrolling the streets in Williamsburg and Bed-Stuy to protect the old Jews. A lot of them were Holocaust survivors, and there was a lot of things happening, putting them in danger. They were there to petition the GA to buy them cars so they could patrol the area and protect these older Jewish people from getting mugged and beat up. So they, this was rock star time. It was just great.
Wow. And there's a story about Meir Kahane coming to Oklahoma,
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. So I don't remember who brought him. I don't remember under what auspices, but I do know that I picked him up at the airport. We had time, so we played Frisbee. He was good. And then he spoke that night. He had not yet gone, I'll put it off the deep. He had not gone over to where he ended up going later on, in Israel, although he was starting to touch on it. And there were some people in the audience that interrupted him, but he got through it all. There was no violence or demonstrations or whatever, just interruptions and stuff. And he, of course, held his own, And then afterwards, we went back to Rabbi Poreth's apartment, and I distinctly remember maybe 3 or 4 of us, maybe 5, on the floor in the living room. We studied text with Rabbi Kahane till like 3 or 4 in the morning. I get emotional thinking about it. It was an experience, even more than Frisbee. It was an experience I will never forget.
Wow. That's a really incredible memory. So now post-college, tell us about sort of coming back to Houston and, the early years of your development as a Jewish communal professional.
Okay. I would like to just add one University of Oklahoma component, which I think is very important. Between the Jews being the rebel rousers on campus and the drugs, because there were those that did and those that didn't, and then those that were in the middle and didn't care one way or the other. The Board of Regents, my last year, decided that they would quadruple the tuition to keep out the hippie commie Jews.
Wow.
At that point, the Jewish population of OU went away because there were lots from Chicago and New York and St. Louis and of course Texas. It went to nothing. Ultimately, Rabbi Poreth left. He moved to Israel. But it wasn't until Dr. Boren took over many years later when he realized that he wanted to make it a more academic institution than it was. Okay, admittedly, he wanted to make it more academic, and he had the feel. He knew he had to hire superb professors. A lot of those professors were Jewish. To have Jewish professors, he needed Jewish students. He knew and understood he needed to create a Jewish community of faculty and students in order to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And it was under him, he had some problems later on, but it was under him that the Jews began coming back and that Hillel was resurrected. And also we had the Schusterman family with another family, I believe, who established the Department for Jewish and Israeli Studies with Professor Norman Stillman as the founding director of that. So that was all under Dr. Boren. So I graduated and came back to Houston. I was determined to get my master's, which I did at University of Houston under Josh Weinstein, as I mentioned. But in Houston already was a gentleman named Rafael Arbisser, and Rafi and his wife Devorah had been in Kansas City and were the educational directors at our synagogue. They arrived in 1951, which was the year I was born. So they joked that they knew me in my mother's belly. They became very good friends with my parents, and when they ended up moving here, because he took over the directorship of education at Beth Yeshua, Mom found the house for them, which is in Meyerland, of course, right around the corner from where I live now. And actually now, Rabbi Silk from Emmanuel lives in that very house. But anyway, wow. I came back, and Rafi, who call him Rafi, yeah, I know. Rafi said to me, so now that you're home, what are you going to do? Work on my master's and go into the Black community and go into the inner city and save the Black community. And he looked at me and he said, Maidala, little girl, Maidala, we have a big enough job saving our own community. So he basically railroaded me into Jewish education. I finished my master's. I had my degree in education. He started giving me jobs at Beth Yeshua. And then in 1977, after he had already left Houston and moved back to Israel with Devorah, I got a call that they're starting a Jewish secondary school, and they had hired a principal, a Jewish community secondary school, not any, conservative Orthodox or whatever. Right. And he was helping this group of parents create it. And they wanted me to be the principal. I had taught most of their kids, so they knew me. And they hired me as the principal in 1977. And I was getting married to an Israeli, big surprise. And in 1978, that January to May is when we recruited a first class of 23 students in the 7th grade, because HISD had not yet moved to 6th grade. And so the short answer to your question of how did I get to Jewish communal work was that Rafi Arbisser totally railroaded me. He was a firm believer. He had dedicated his life to it, and he saw, I guess, in me, or wanted to steer me to focus my attention in a community that he felt needed attention.
Very good. So tell us a little bit about the early years, or the founding of the it came to be known as the Weiner School. Is that right? I want to make sure I'm getting it right, or was it not yet?
Yes, it started off as the Jewish Secondary School, and we started off with one class in 7th, 23 kids, and then the idea was every year we would continue and then add a new 7th grade class. And that's what we were doing. When HISD moved to 6th grade, we met with Beth Yeshua, and we met with Rabbi Carr at Beth Israel, because they already had the school then, and said, look, we got to do this, but we knew it would impact them. And so we all came together with, yes, if we're going to sustain a Jewish day school, secondary school, we have to do what HISD is doing. If not, we're going to lose those kids to public schools or other private schools. So it started off as Jewish secondary. We rented classrooms from Congregation Brit Shalom on Bellaire. And I was the founding principal. I was there for 5 years. And at one point, don't remember exactly when, the Weiner family wanted to honor the memory of Isidore Weiner, the patriarch, and they gave us a significant contribution, and we renamed the school the Weiner Jewish Secondary School. During that time also, we knew we were busting the seams and we needed to move. And so Rafi, Mr. Arbisser, and Shirley Stein and I found out about this property on the loop, is it the West Loop, South Loop, whatever it is, between Bissonnet and West Park. And it was the old Marian School. And we just thought it needed some refurbishing, how perfect to be there. The board disagreed. That's where the Episcopal school is now. The board disagreed and said the Jewish community is moving out of Meyerland and moving to Fondren Southwest, so we need to move there. Well, we had this gorgeous design of a school with Bob Davis, architect, and it was like Jerusalem stone, and there was going to be the high school group and the middle school group with an adjoining space for cafeteria and theater and art spaces. And if you've been to the Emery-Weiner School today, that's exactly what it is. Except they ditched that idea when they bought the Gessner property, clear out at Gessner and past airport. I don't even guess, whatever, Gessner and something between airport and Belford, I think. And they built this gray brick institutional building. Well, during that time, one of the board members felt that they needed to make a change in leadership and decided that I needed to go and someone else new needed to come. So I never stepped foot in that building. They went through 4 or maybe 5 principals and and they got rid of the high school because they said the kids didn't want it. And they only were the middle school, and the school population took a dive. Ultimately, Alona Thompson was hired, and it was a great move. And she continued with the school all the way to the move to Stella Link.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So after my 5 years there, I got fired. I'm real honest about it. I got fired. I had a kind of a year off. I had gone to Jerry Wishy. He knew me because we worked together. The kids did all their PE there. And he said, well, not yet. And a year later, he called me with a job. The interesting thing about Weiner, during those 5 years, we were at 117 students from 6th grade through 11th grade. And we dedicated ourselves, and this is, Rafi talking in my ear, this is our future, he would say, of really getting to know the kids. So we had some kids that were brilliant and off the charts, and then we had some kids not so brilliant, but we knew there was something special there. And through various programs that we initiated and this incredible attention that the staff and I had for these kids, we were able to really give these kids incredible opportunities. And many went on to do absolutely mind-boggling things, which we don't have time to talk about, but I can tell, yeah. I assure you, went on.
I'm sure. What kinds of opportunities are you referring to?
I think that I'm most proud of the Science Humanities Fair. Schools were required for students to participate in science fairs, and you had to do a science experiment and all. And so I had this kid, Shai, who wanted to study physical anthropology. I was like, well, Well, we came up with the idea, and he wanted to study with someone. So we thought to ourselves, Edith Zinn, who had been a teacher there, she was a science and math teacher there. Edith and I talked about it, and we said, well, if we could pair him with a physical anthropologist, which we found at the dental school, then why couldn't everyone else have a mentor? And so we paired kids based on what they wanted to work on with a mentor, all free. I mean, it didn't cost anybody anything. And they worked together with scientists and professors. Well, along came this young man named Alan Liebman, and he said, I don't like science, I just want to cook. So his parent, they have Liebman's Fine Wines and Fine Liquors and Food today. His sister runs it. So Alan wanted to cook, paired him up with Willie Romich, who owned this restaurant in town, and he learned to cook. Oh my God, he was the most popular booth because he was making crepes with a big white chef hat on. Anyway, fast forward, Alan Liebman went on to the Miami International School, I think. He graduated from Culinary Institute of America. He was the first Jew hired by the Ritz-Carlton Group, and ultimately went with the international group that opened up Atlantis. He opened up Atlantis Hotel and Properties in Bahamas, in Melbourne, and then spent many years in Dubai after they sent him to Morocco to learn Arabic. This was this kid that just said, I just want to cook. Those those are the kinds of opportunities that we were able to provide during those 5 years with the kids.
Really, really.
And there are many more, but
I'm
no
sure
time for it.
Yeah, no, I wish we had more time. So you were starting to tell us about Jerry Wishy, executive director at the JCC, and you know,
at the JCCC, yeah.
Yeah, and the conversations about bringing you on board.
Yes. So after my 5 years at Weiner and getting fired, my reputation and my name had been destroyed. And so Jerry said, there's a black cloud, let it pass. I'll call you in a year. And Jerry, who I credit with giving me an opportunity, offered me 3 part-time jobs. And one of them was arts and culture. Well, I didn't know a serograph from a lithograph. I still don't, but I know what I like when I see it, and I know what's worth spending money and time on. And what I think the community will enjoy, whether it's educationally or entertainment-wise, or just plain enlightenment. So I started there doing some book fair work, working with the children's programming for book fair. I was working on the art exhibition season, and then anything else my supervisor, Marty Maskowitz and Mark Litt, would throw at me and say, hey, let's try to do a film festival, or what ideas do you have? And one of them early on was like, gosh, I don't even remember, 1987, 88, I don't know, 86, was Yiddish programming. I really wanted to do a lot of Yiddish programming, and we started that. Just in my little office space, starting with talking with the Gang of Four, you know, who are still very involved, Henrietta Bell and Susan Gans and Julia Mazo and Barbara Goldstein. And then we started Sephardic programming. There was a vibrant program there, primarily the book fair that Charlie Fishman had started in 1973 and the art exhibition season. Performing arts was extremely vibrant, but it was a separate department at that time. And they controlled the theater, actually. We had to beg to get the theater for something or anything, right? Mm-hmm. So by the time when I started, it was part-time, and then in 86, my supervisor, Marty Maskowitz, left to go to the Brooklyn Sephardic Center. And I had just had my second child, and Jerry said, it's a month before book festival, but it was book fair at the time. Book fair, can you come back full time? It's not thrilled, but I did, and no looking back, I stayed full time for the rest of my tenure.
Yeah, and what a tenure it turned out to be. What I mean, you can talk more about the book fair, you can talk about the film festival. When you look back over, more than 3 decades of your time, creating, the world of Jewish arts and culture for Houston, what performances or lectures or events stand out the most?
There are lots, but I'll give you a few. And, for me, discovery, finding something new, exciting, something I think people should experience, even if they don't know they should experience it. Again, a lesson from Rafi from years ago with Jewish education. We have to kind of be at the forefront of it, not wait around for, someone to tell us what we think. So what are the standouts? Oh my gosh. Okay. So David Grossman, 1987, The Yellow Wind, 40 people listening to him. And because he was considered such a radical at the time, I thought I was going to lose my job. Jerzy Kaczynski, 1988. He's one of those got to get him, in my mind. Jerzy Kaczynski, I worked with his wife Kiki. At the time, she thought it would be good for Yershi. And it was, still looking back in my 35 years, the quintessential book festival program, because one of the things he said that night from the stage was, we cannot define Jewish culture and history from 1933 to 1945. There was a lot before and there was a lot after. Well, my dear friend and teacher, Ziggy Isaacson, head of the Holocaust survivors, was in the audience and went nuts. And they engaged in a big conversation back and forth, heated but not ugly, until I had to close it down. But to me, it was what Book Festival is all about, what book fair, any book and author event is about. Elie Wiesel, of course, every time he came. Carl Sagan and his wife, Andrew Yan, 2,000 people. The signing line for their book was about 2 hours. It was in the gym, and I also learned because they wanted to sit at a table, much like Elie Wiesel always did. They wanted to sit at a table, but I learned that night that you have to be sure you put a cloth that goes all the way to the floor, because Ms. Duran would get really excited when she talked about the monkeys and would move forward and her legs would open. Anyway, gosh, Lord Rabbi Sachs. It took me 10 years working with Alti Karper, who I adore, at Schocken Books to bring him. And when he walked in the door that night, he looked at me and he said, well, Marilyn, it just took me 10 years. And I have to tell you, Jerzy Kosinski on the way out the door, and that was 88, he killed himself in 91, I think. He walked out the door. Before he left the doors of the J, he turned around and he looked at me and he said, Marilyn, you keep doing what you're doing because what you're doing is so important. You know, and you just, like one of those. As far as music, yeah, you know, I mean, music, I mean, look, David Broza, who's a friend, you know, brought him 5 times, but then Yemen blues and Esta, Yemenite music, world music, jazz, nobody knew them. I used to literally jump out of my car. It was when a lot of Israelis were running the ice cream trucks and that they were at the Galleria working the booths, and I'd be running around and I'd hand them flyers about these programs. And, you know, how did you know I was an Israeli? Well, so Yemen blues, Rabbi Kahalani, and the cool thing about that, which is part of all this, and is how programs are built, is that in his group, there were other musicians who ultimately spun off and created their own groups. And so we'd have this one, you know, let's say Itamar, you know, we'd have Omer Avital, and then Omer Avital had Hadar Neuberg, and then Hadar Neuberg would come, and she had Ellie DeGibri, and it would be one after the other like that. The Klezmatics, good friends, adore them so many times. Dr. Professor Pinchas Pelly was the first Horowitz Scholar in 1989. That was a program that Jerry Wishy and I with Bunny Horowitz started. Dr. Pelly came that February, and he was already dying of cancer, but his doctor in Israel said it would be good for him. He ran an amazing program. I would watch him just lift himself up in front of the class. You would never know. It was a 1-month-long program at that time. And when he returned to Israel, he died within, I think, 8 days of returning to Israel. It was 1989.
Oh my gosh.
There have been dance companies. I mean, yeah. Okay. Dance companies, Vertigo Dance Company. I'm in my office and I found this beat up folder. It was like the year 2000, I guess it was, something like that. It was from 1992 of these 2 dancers that had, you know, just come out of the army and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I wonder if I can find them. They look pretty awesome. There was not email. There was no, you know, we were not doing videos that we could see who these people are. You read a piece of paper, and maybe if you're lucky, you got a cassette tape to listen to something, or maybe, I think, a video to watch. I tracked them down in Israel. Lo and behold, by that point, they had created Vertigo Dance Company. We were their United States premiere. The consulate in New York didn't even know who they were. They helped us bring them here, and they are now internationally world famous. Another standout, I have to tell you, and I'm looking because I wrote down some, and I know we can't go through all of them, but so we did a lot of partnerships over the years. One of the things that I really felt was important, and many of my lay people, they jumped on board, as did the administration, was you have to partner with Society for Performing Arts and Houston Grand Opera. And I mean, there were so many programs we did together with all these folks, Houston Ballet. But we also did a program with Diverse Works, and it was a Buto dance program. Buto is Japanese dance of darkness, and it's usually based on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's very dark and whatever. Well, I didn't go opening night. And when I talked to my guy who was there as the technician, I said, how'd it go? And he said, well, they wore clothes in the rehearsal. And I was like, oh my God. So apparently two of the dancers, I think two of the women dancers, were slithering across the stage with these ankle bells on their ankles. Now, there was an Orthodox man and woman. She was chair of my art committee. They brought their 13-year-old post-bar mitzvah boy because they wanted to begin exposing him to dance. And they knew that if Marilyn and Miss Maxine, the dance director, was behind this, it would be kosher. Well, fast forward, one of the dancers left the ring of the ankle bells, and we hung it back in the technician's office. And we used to say, if we needed to get the technician's attention, we'd ring the bells. So, you know, partnerships are great, and then sometimes things happen that you don't count on. Saturday night, we made a little disclaimer at the beginning as we were checking people in with their tickets so they knew that there was nudity on stage. You know, it's art.
It's art. Talk a little bit, Marilyn, about
Bobby
some of
Samuels.
I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the community volunteers and lay people who helped you build arts and culture into what it's become.
Very, very important. And I have to say, the JCC, Evelyn Rubenstein, the J under Jerry, and continuing under Joel, there is a culture of staff-lay partnerships. It is highly unusual. It's not always that way. Definitely not in the arts world. You'll have a board, but you don't have lay people and staff people coming together in meetings and learning about the materials and seeing them, you know, and coming together to curate, to basically co-curate programs. I loved working with committees. And like I say, at other JCCs and synagogue, you know, you just don't have that situation. So that was an important part of the culture. And I had an incredible run with amazing lay people. Some of them had been my junior high school girlfriends and high school girlfriends, but a lot more. And I always, and they brought to the table hopes and wishes and dreams. And one of the lay people said to me one time, you know what's wonderful about working at the J is you can bring your dreams to the table and the J staff help make it happen. Mm. And so that's what we did. And it wasn't that they dictated, and it wasn't that staff dictated. I was able, and it permeates the J, to have this respectful partnership in co-curating, in coming together on a final decision, whatever that decision is. I had the pleasure of working on, I think, 4 Maccabi games when we hosted the North American Maccabi games. And with my partner, Mark Gessner, we produced opening ceremonies. And that was also a whole nother group of volunteers and community people. Not necessarily J people, some yes, but that was a whole nother group. Some of my former students, you know, were sitting around the table one night. There were 25 out of 40 of them there. I had taught all 25 of them, and now they had kids that were 12 and 13 and 14, 15 years old. But that was the J's culture, and it really is unique. And I have to say that making a layperson's dreams happen, whether that's this one author they have to have, or this one music group they want to make sure, or just working with the committee to curate the music season, it's so incredibly satisfying. And vice versa, they understand when I have something like Rabbi Lord Sachs or Jerzy Kaczynski, or I'm telling you, Koresh Dance, take a chance. I'm telling you, we got to take a chance. Of course, they've been here 3 times. it's the most amazing way to function and work. And I personally don't understand why organizations really, I'm not criticizing, but it's interesting. I think there's an energy, let me put it this way. I think there's an energy when you're sitting around the table with 5, 10, 15, our book festival committee used to be 50 people. There's an energy there. And they beget other people. They bring their friends because they're involved. They get donors. They donate themselves. I mean, the patron campaign, which started in 1973 with the first book festival, I mean, grew exponentially because people were engaged and involved. And the other thing we were able to do, and I can conclude this piece, and I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, ask me another question, is that we were very cognizant of succession. And one of the things I worked hard on was making sure that after a few years of leadership, like nobody was on for more than like a couple of years, and they would bring someone else on who would kind of be in training, and then they would bring new committee people. And so there was this rolling evolution of new faces, fresh faces. Sometimes we had to roll people off that had been around 20 years to make way for fresh faces, not necessarily young, but fresh, different ways of thinking. And so we were very committed in arts and culture to bring on new people, new leadership who would learn at the heels of the person with whom they were working as the chair, and then they stepped into chairmanship, brought someone new in, and that way also we were able to jump decades, meaning a 65-year-old book festival chair or art chair might bring a visual arts chair or film festival chair might bring on a 50-year-old or maybe even a 45-year-old. And then that person was there, brought in her friends or his friends, and it just kept rolling along. And then there was a time then you step back and you bring the younger generation. You get it's a very dynamic, exciting way to run a program, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a really strong model for building a great program is having, great volunteers and having, as you said, this ability to train the next generation while the current generation is still active and involved. So,
and part of that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Part of that is also helping the seasoned volunteers understand that some of these new voices are going to think differently. And we have to be open to those new voices if we're going to continue to evolve leadership, to assure the future, to build audiences of new people. They've done some wonderful things in the last few years since I've been gone, the last 2 years, to kind of change committee working models and all, which is great. That's what it's supposed to be. The other thing that I worked with my committees to understand is if, the big thing of however many, 15 years ago, how are we going to get the 20s and 30s? If, it's not a singles program where they're meeting to date, but we want to introduce them to arts and culture. Well, realize that they couldn't sit down at the same table with everybody else, because where this person is and the 25-year-old is totally different. So so we would separate them out, and we did create a separate committee of the 20s and 30s so that they could curate their own programs, but with a clear understanding of the mission, whether it's the book festival or the film festival. But, a 60 or 70-year-old or even a 50-year-old should not be saying, I think the 20-year-olds are going to love this film. So we made those kinds of changes too by spinning off some very specific groups. Parents, 40 and 50, the parents created groups where they curated the programs they wanted, rather than grandma saying, I'm a grandma, I can say that, saying, oh, we think you will like this. So that's part of that lay staff partner relationship as well.
Sure, makes sense. You have the luxury of being retired now, and so this is not your problem directly. But so much of your work is about creating these live performances, right? These concerts and book fair lectures. And in the middle of this ongoing pandemic, all of that is different. So I'm interested in hearing your reflections on, even though you're not the person in charge anymore, right? What challenges does somebody in your role have trying to create arts and culture programming right now? And is there any kind of silver lining or opportunity, as so many of these events have had to all move onto Zoom and other platforms? How do you do it?
Yeah, okay. So interesting enough, I'm doing some consulting work for national organization, the Jewish Book Council, that deals with all the authors. And so we spent a lot of time, talking about this. Okay, so you're right. Arts and culture is all about sitting in a theater with a stranger or with a friend, right? Someone once said, where but in a theater can you have a transformational experience with a stranger? And I've never forgotten that, and it's true. So I will tell you that when all this happened, there was this sigh of relief of, thank God I'm retired. And then there was an absolute sadness for the additional pressures on all the program people, whether they're in Houston, the rabbis, the JCCs, the schools, and all. And I said, oh my God, what they are having to deal with. They're amazing. They're amazing. The arts and culture world, which is, my world, they have done an incredible job of harnessing the creative energy of those who are artistic directors, basically, for those who are artists and have created probably even more than any of us can absorb, an incredible arts and culture virtual world. There's so much content out there, which is great. You can pick and choose. I don't think people are getting tired. I think they may slow down and they may pick and choose a little more. I mean, I know I did at 3 months. For 3 months, I was like nonstop, and then I was like, whoa, wait a minute. After the Great Jewish Food Festival, 12 programs in, 5 days or whatever I did, I was like, okay, time out. But they have harnessed all this creativity and figured out how to do it virtually, on top of which it has expanded the ability to program. Because if an author is in the UK or in Israel, you would have to fly them in, put them up for hotel, do all these things, let alone those that are stateside. But you've got music groups and artists and film, everything that you can access now virtually, as long as the technology is working, which is the big thing. You can put it out there technologically and it can be wonderful. Now, it's not the same as sitting in a theater. It's not the same as going able to go up to the author and take that picture with him or her, or getting into a post-Horowitz scholar lecture, one-on-one disagreement, right? All of those sorts of things are out the door. They're doing some things, but that's out the door. And that's why, looking in my crystal ball, I think that the virtual world will not supplant live theater, live everything. I'll say live theater, meaning all kinds of arts and culture, because people crave to be together, whether it's in the fitness center, okay, or whether it's in a theater. And so I think the virtual world will continue to open up possibilities that we might not otherwise had been able to present, but it's not going to take over. I think as soon as people can, listen, I subscribe to Houston Grand Opera and Houston Ballet, and I'm like dying here, right? But I also know I'm very blessed and very lucky to have the life I have, because not everybody in this madness has that. And I need to put that out there. But as soon as we can start getting back into those theaters and get live human beings up there that we can interact with, that we can talk to or friend with, or nudge our person sitting next to us that we don't even know and say, could you move your foot? You're cramping my space. As soon as we can do that, we're going to do it. I know that.
Yeah, for sure. I know for me, things that we used to all take for granted, right? Just being able to go to a concert or a movie or a ball game, and just like you said, we all crave that human connection, and the arts is just so vital to our sense of
right.
leading a rich and meaningful life.
We are.
Yeah, but we're also resilient and we're adaptable.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I'm also really inspired by how everybody in our community, from the rabbis to other communal professionals, have adapted and improvised on the fly to keep things going. I want to ask you, just as kind of a final question as we wrap up here, what do you think makes this community special? You came here almost 60 years ago. You've spent the vast majority of your life here. You built your career here. What, when you travel or you talk to other people about the Houston Jewish community, what in your mind makes this place, this community, stand out?
That is such an important question, and the answer is so easy. We get along. It is a community that works together, that respects each other. There are a few outliers here and there, but the bulk of the community, we respect the community calendar, we partner, we feel comfortable jumping from Beth Israel, because I want to go hear the cantor there, to Beth Yeshua and J.B. Greenfield Chapel, and I really want to go hear the new cantor we do that with ease, and we're welcomed when we walk in the door. Our community is unique, and I say that because during my 35 years in arts and culture, I also had the opportunity to work, commiserate, talk to colleagues from across the United States. It is not that way. There are competing book fairs. There are community calendars that people don't respect, will program purposely against each other, and they could be down the street. Houston, and I credit Rabbi Rudinsky for creating this, and everybody will tell you that. It was Rabbi Rudinsky who helped this community come together as a community, respect each other, work with each other. It's unique. It is unique, and that's what makes Houston so special. This Houston Jewish community so special.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today and to look back and reflect. And I want to thank you for your time and wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And when I sat down and started writing notes, I have to tell you that I not that anyone will ever want to read it, but I do think I have a book here, and I think it was Melissa Weniger who said, if you ever write a book, title it, I Played Frisbee with Rabbi Kahana. So thank you very much. This was a dream.
That's great. Thank you so much, Marilyn.